I pulled into the gravel driveway of my newly purchased house in rural Oregon, listening to the crunch of stones under my tires as I brought the truck to a stop. The two-bedroom home sat nestled among tall pines, looking exactly like the photos from the listing, but somehow more real now that it was mine. 3 acres of forest stretched out behind it, creating a natural barrier between me and the rest of the world. Home sweet home, I said to myself as I cut the engine. I hopped out of my pickup and walked to the back, lowering the tailgate to reveal the boxes and suitcases I'd packed with whatever I wanted to keep from my old life. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago, and the job transfer to the regional office came at just the right time. A fresh start away from Portland, away from the memories, away from running into Jessica at our old haunts. I grabbed 2 boxes marked kitchen and headed up the wooden steps to the front door. The key stuck a little in the lock, something I'd need to fix, but the door swung open to reveal my new space. The house smelled musty and unused, which made sense since Remy Ross had moved out to a nursing home nearly 2 months ago. The real estate agent Avery had mentioned that Mr. Ross had lived here for decades, but left most of the furniture behind when he moved. The place was indeed sparse. A dining table with 4 chairs, an old couch in the living room, and the kitchen appliances. The bedrooms were completely empty, which suited me fine. I didn't want to sleep on some stranger's mattress anyway. I spent that first week in a blur of activity. I assembled my bed frame, arranged my home office in the second bedroom, and unpacked what felt like a million boxes. Each night I fell into bed exhausted but satisfied. The silence took some getting used to after years of city noise. No traffic sounds, no neighbors arguing through thin apartment walls, no sirens wailing at odd hours. Just the occasional hoot of an owl or the whisper of wind through pine needles. On the 8th day, I decided to deep clean the kitchen. The previous owner had left it reasonably tidy, but I wanted to scrub everything down to make it truly mine. I pulled out the stove till I pulled out the stove to clean behind it, then tackled the refrigerator. It was an older model, but still working fine. As I pushed against the side to move it away from the wall, the fridge budged reluctantly with a scraping sound. That's when I spotted it, a folded piece of paper that had been wedged between the wall and the appliance. It must have fallen there years ago and been forgotten. I reached down and picked it up, curious what I might find. The paper was yellowed with age, the creases worn so deeply they were almost tearing. I carefully unfolded it and found a handwritten note. At the top, in bold capital letters, someone had written, "Rules for 1247 Pine Ridge Road. Follow these or leave." Below that dramatic heading were 6 numbered rules, though I couldn't make out all the details in the kitchen's dim light. At the bottom was a signature, Remy Ross. I snorted and shook my head. Well, that's not ominous at all, I muttered to myself. I took the note to the kitchen table where the light was better and read through the rules. They ranged from the odd, never leave bedroom closet doors open overnight, to the truly bizarre, place a glass of milk and a loaf of bread on the back porch steps every Sunday evening. The whole thing read like the ravings of someone who'd spent too much time alone in the woods. "Sorry, Remy," I said to the empty house, "but I'm not living by your weird superstitions." I crumpled the paper into a ball and tossed it toward the trash can in the corner of the kitchen. It bounced off the rim and landed on the floor, but I didn't bother picking it up. I had cleaning to finish. After getting the kitchen spotless, I made myself dinner and ate while watching the sunset through the kitchen window. The forest looked different as darkness fell, the spaces between trees turning into pools of shadow. But it wasn't threatening, just nature doing its thing. Later that night, as I got ready for bed, I remembered the first rule on Remy's list and looked at my bedroom closet. The door stood partially open, my clothes visible inside. With a small, defiant smile, I walked over and pushed the door all the way open. "Take that, Remy," I said, feeling a little childish, but satisfied nonetheless. I crossed to the window and pulled back the curtain, looking out at the dark forest beyond. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light across the tops of the pines. I could just make out the edge of my property where the trees grew denser and taller. Standing there, gazing into the darkness, I felt a sense of ownership and freedom I hadn't experienced in years. This place was mine. No paranoid rules from the previous owner were going to dictate how I lived in my own home. I let the curtain fall back and climbed into bed, deliberately leaving both the closet door open and the curtains undrawn. As I drifted off to sleep, I wondered briefly what had made Remy Ross so fearful in this peaceful place. Whatever it wasn't my problem now. I jolted awake at 12:30 in the morning, my heart racing as 3 heavy knocks echoed through the house. The sound was deliberate. 3 distinct raps, a pause, then 3 more. I sat up in bed, disoriented, trying to make sense of what had pulled me from sleep. The knocking came again. Same pattern. 3 knocks, silence, 3 knocks. Whoever stood at my door wasn't giving up. I fumbled for my phone on the nightstand, squinting at the bright screen. 12:32. Who the hell would be at my door at this hour? Something nagged at me as I swung my legs over the side of the bed, something about the time and visitors. Then it clicked. Remy's weird list of rules. Rule number 3. Never answer the door between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. no matter how long the knocking continues. I snorted quietly. It seemed ridiculous to even consider that scribbled list of superstitious nonsense. And yet, sitting there in the dark, listening to those measured, patient knocks, I hesitated. This is stupid, I muttered to myself, but I didn't move toward the door. The knocking continued, maintaining the same rhythm. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. I told myself I was just being practical. Anyone with actual legitimate business would come back during normal hours. Maybe it was a lost driver looking for directions, but they'd figure it out. Or they could try calling instead of pounding on a stranger's door after midnight. So I stayed put, listening as the knocking continued. It went on for what felt like forever, though my phone told me it was only about 10 minutes. Then, mid-pattern, it stopped. The silence that followed seemed heavier than before, more noticeable. I waited, ears straining for any sound, footsteps walking away, a car starting, anything. But there was nothing, just the usual creaks of the house and the distant sound of wind in the pines. After 20 minutes of silence, I finally felt my eyelids growing heavy again. As I drifted back to sleep, I tried to convince myself it was probably just someone who had taken a wrong turn on the rural roads out here. Nothing sinister, nothing supernatural. Just a lost driver who'd move on to find help elsewhere. Morning came with bright sunlight streaming through the windows I'd left uncurtained. I'd slept later than intended, the disruption to my night having thrown off my schedule. Coffee in hand, I stepped outside to check the front of the house. I wasn't sure what I expected to find. A note maybe, or some evidence of who had been knocking. But there was nothing. The dirt driveway showed no fresh tire tracks or footprints other than my own from yesterday. No paper tucked into the doorframe. No sign anyone had been here at all. I walked the perimeter of the house looking for any indication of visitors, but found nothing out of the ordinary. The forest around the property looked the same as always. Tall pines swaying slightly in the morning breeze, the undergrowth thick and undisturbed. Had I dreamed the whole thing? The knocking had seemed so real, so persistent. But standing here in the clear light of day, with no evidence to support what I'd heard, I began to doubt myself. Maybe it had been the wind or a branch hitting the house. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me, influenced by that ridiculous list of rules I'd found. I went back inside and got to work, pushing the incident from my mind. The next few days passed uneventfully, as I settled into my routine, working remotely during the day, exploring the property in the evenings, and slowly making the house feel more like mine. 3 days after the knocking incident, I was sitting at my desk in the second bedroom I'd converted to a home office. The afternoon had been productive, and I was deep into a spreadsheet when I heard it. Footsteps directly above me. I froze, fingers hovering over the keyboard. The steps were distinct and deliberate, moving across what would be the attic space. Thump, thump, thump. A pause. Then more steps, as if someone were pacing back and forth. I glanced up at the ceiling, tracking the sound as it moved from one side to the other. The house was old, sure, but these weren't the random, settling noises of an aging structure. These were footsteps, the unmistakable sound of weight shifting from one foot to another. "Hello," I called out, feeling immediately foolish. I knew no one else was in the house. The footsteps continued, uninterrupted by my voice. I stood up, grabbing my phone from the desk. For a moment, I considered calling someone, the police maybe. But what would I say? That I heard footsteps in my attic. They'd think I was crazy or wasting their time. Instead, I went to the hallway and looked up at the access panel in the ceiling. I'd noticed it during my initial tour of the house, but hadn't bothered to explore the attic yet. Now it seemed I had no choice. I pulled the folding stepladder from the hall closet and set it up beneath the panel. The footsteps continued overhead, seemingly oblivious to my presence below. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, testing it with a quick flick before returning to the ladder. The wooden steps creaked under my weight as I climbed. The access panel was just a thin piece of painted plywood that lifted and slid to the side. I pushed it up with one hand, holding the flashlight in the other, and poked my head into the dark space. The beam of light cut through the dusty air of the attic. It was unfinished. Just exposed beams, insulation, and a plywood walkway down the center. The air was hot and still, with that distinct musty smell of enclosed spaces rarely disturbed. I swept the flashlight around, half expecting to see someone duck behind a chimney stack or pile of boxes. But there was nothing. No person, no animal, not even many stored items. Just dust, cobwebs, and the occasional dead insect. I pulled myself up fully into the attic, the flashlight beam bouncing as I moved. The footsteps had stopped the moment I'd pushed open the access panel. Now the space was completely silent, except for my own movements. I walked carefully along the plywood path, checking every corner and shadow. The flashlight revealed nothing unusual, no signs that anyone had been up here recently. The dust on the walkway was undisturbed, except for my own footprints forming as I moved. There were no footprints other than mine, no indication that anyone else had walked here in months, maybe years. I completed a full circuit of the attic, checking behind the chimney and in every corner where the roof sloped down to meet the floor. Nothing. Not even a mouse or a raccoon that might have caused the noise. I stood in the center of the attic, turning slowly in place, the flashlight beam cutting through dust motes that danced in the air. The footsteps I'd heard had been clear and distinct, a person walking directly above my office. But there was no one here, and no evidence anyone had been here. I made my way back to the access panel and climbed down, sliding the panel back into place. Standing in the hallway, I looked up at the ceiling, half expecting the footsteps to resume now that I'd left the attic. But the house remained quiet. I returned to my office and stared at my computer screen, the spreadsheet still open and waiting. But I couldn't focus anymore. First the knocking, now footsteps in an empty attic. I was starting to wonder if there might be something to Remy's rules after all. I climbed back down from the attic, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. Or rather, what I hadn't seen. The dust on the plywood walkway had shown only my own fresh footprints, with no sign anyone else had been up there. I returned the stepladder to the hall closet and stood in the hallway, looking up at the ceiling. Within minutes, the footsteps started again. Thump, thump, thump. They sounded heavier than before, more deliberate, like whoever, or whatever, was up there wanted to make sure I heard them. The footsteps moved in a straight line across the ceiling, then stopped, then started again in the opposite direction. More purposeful this time, as if responding to my intrusion. I stood frozen in the hallway, staring up at the ceiling panels. This made no sense. I'd just checked every corner of that attic space. There was nowhere for anyone to hide, and the dust pattern had confirmed I was the only one who'd been up there. Remy's rules suddenly popped into my head. Rule number 5. If you hear footsteps in the attic, play music loudly until they stop. I'd dismissed those rules as the paranoid ramblings of an old man. But now, with unexplained footsteps pacing above my head in an empty attic, I wasn't so sure. This is ridiculous, I muttered to myself. But I headed to the living room anyway. My stereo system was still packed away in one of the moving boxes. I dug through 3 boxes before finding it, the footsteps continuing overhead the entire time. I plugged in the speakers and connected my phone, scrolling through my playlists with shaking hands. Feeling completely foolish, but increasingly unnerved, I hit play on the first song I found and cranked the volume knob all the way up. The opening guitar riffs of an old rock song blasted through the house at a volume that would definitely annoy any neighbors, if I'd had any within earshot. The footsteps stopped immediately. I stood still, waiting, the music pounding in my ears. Nothing. The footsteps were gone. Just a coincidence, I told myself, but I didn't turn the music down. Instead, I moved through the house, checking windows and doors, making sure everything was locked. All the while, I kept glancing up at the ceiling, half expecting the footsteps to start again. They didn't. I kept the music playing for a full hour, moving from room to room, unable to focus on anything else. Eventually, I started to feel ridiculous. I gradually lowered the volume, waiting between each adjustment to see if the footsteps would return. They didn't come back that night. I slept poorly, waking at every creak and groan of the house settling. By morning, I'd convinced myself that there had to be a logical explanation. Old houses made noises. Maybe there were animals in the walls or roof space I hadn't spotted. Maybe the wood expanded and contracted with temperature changes. But over the next week, I couldn't maintain that rational explanation. The phenomena described in Remy's rules happened with increasing frequency, following the exact patterns he'd outlined. Every night after midnight, someone knocked on my front door with the same pattern, always 3 raps, pause, 3 raps. The first night after the attic incident, I nearly jumped out of my skin when it started. I stayed in bed, remembering Remy's 3rd rule. Never answer the door between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m., no matter how long the knocking continues. I lay there, covers pulled up, listening to the rhythmic knocking. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. Over and over. After about 15 minutes, it stopped mid-pattern, just as it had before. Each morning, I checked outside for evidence of visitors, footprints, tire tracks, anything. But the gravel driveway and the dirt around the porch showed no signs of disturbance other than my own tracks from the previous day. The attic footsteps occurred almost nightly now. Sometimes they'd start as early as sunset, other times not until well after midnight. Each time, I turned on music, loud, and each time, they stopped immediately. I began keeping my stereo remote close at hand. I found myself checking the other rules on Remy's list more carefully. I made sure the curtains were drawn by 10 every night. I didn't go outside after dark if I could help it. On the 6th night, exhausted from poor sleep and the constant stress of unexplained noises, I went to bed early. I was so tired I forgot to check that my bedroom closet door was fully closed. Remy's first rule. Never leave bedroom closet doors open overnight. I fell into a deep sleep almost immediately. Something woke me around 2 in the morning. A change in the air pressure of the room, perhaps, or some subtle noise I couldn't quite identify. I lay still for a moment, disoriented, then rolled over to check the time on my phone. The glow from the screen illuminated enough of the room for me to see that my closet door was wide open. I sat up, suddenly wide awake. I distinctly remembered closing that door before bed. Or had I? Had I been too tired and forgotten? As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I noticed something else. All my hanging clothes had been pushed to the sides of the closet rail. They were still swaying slightly, as though someone had just rifled through them, looking for something, but there was no air movement in the room. The window was closed. The ceiling fan was off. Nothing could explain why my clothes were moving. I sat frozen in bed, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. The clothes continued their gentle swaying for another minute before gradually coming to a stop. I didn't sleep again that night. I kept the lights on and sat with my back against the headboard until dawn, eyes fixed on that open closet door. But nothing else happened. When morning finally came, I got up and inspected the closet carefully. Nothing was missing. Nothing was damaged. The only thing out of place was that all the clothes had been pushed to the sides, creating an empty space in the middle, as if making room for something to stand there. I closed the closet door firmly and placed a chair against it before leaving the room. I couldn't explain what was happening in this house, but I could no longer deny that something was happening. Something that Remy Ross had apparently lived with for years. Something he'd learned to manage through his strange set of rules. Rules I had initially mocked, but was now starting to follow with increasing dedication. I retrieved Remy's note from the trash and smoothed it out on the kitchen table. The crumpled paper resisted at first, creases and folds making the handwriting harder to read in places. I ran my palm over it several times, pressing the yellow paper flat against the wood grain. The rules stared back at me, no longer seeming like the paranoid ramblings of an old man. 1. Never leave bedroom closet doors open overnight. 2. Keep all window curtains closed after 10 p.m. 3. Do not answer doors between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. 4. If you hear footsteps in the attic, play music loudly until they stop. 5. Do not go outside between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. for any reason. 6. Place a glass of milk and a loaf of bread on the back porch steps every Sunday evening. I read through the list twice, my finger tracing each line. Just a week ago, I'd laughed at these instructions. Now, after what I'd experienced, they seemed like a survival manual. The closet incident had been the tipping point. Those clothes pushed aside as if making room for something to stand there. I shuddered, remembering how they swayed with no breeze in the room. The memory made my skin prickle. I folded the note carefully this time, creasing it along clean lines, and placed it in the drawer next to the sink where I kept takeout menus and other household papers. Whatever was happening in this house, Remy had found a way to manage it for 30 years. If following his rules meant I could do the same, then so be it. Sunday arrived with a clear sky and mild temperature. I spent the day cleaning, trying not to think about the ritual I'd need to perform that evening. Around 6, I found myself standing in my kitchen, staring at a glass of milk and a fresh loaf of bread I'd picked up from the grocery store that morning. This is crazy, I muttered to myself, picking up both items. I walked through the house to the back door, unlocked it, and stepped onto the small wooden porch. 3 wooden steps led down to a cleared area that eventually gave way to pine trees and underbrush. I placed the glass of milk on the middle step and set the bread beside it, still in its paper wrapper. I felt ridiculous, like I was leaving offerings for some woodland fairy tale creature. Part of me still wanted to believe there was a logical explanation for everything that had happened. Maybe neighborhood kids playing pranks or some elaborate scheme by the previous owner. But I'd seen no footprints outside after the knocking. I'd found no one in the attic despite the clear sound of footsteps, and I couldn't explain away what had happened with my closet. I took one last look at the milk and bread sitting on the step, shook my head at the absurdity of it all, and went back inside, locking the door behind me. That night, I checked my bedroom closet door twice before going to bed, making sure it was firmly shut. I drew all the curtains well before 10, and when the knocking came at midnight, 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks. I pulled my pillow over my head and tried to ignore it. I slept poorly, waking several times to check that my closet door remained closed. When my alarm went off at 6:30, I felt groggy and disoriented. It took me a moment to remember the milk and bread. I pulled on a pair of sweatpants and a t-shirt, padded through the quiet house to the back door, and peered outside. The steps were empty. Completely empty. I pushed the door open and stepped out onto the porch, looking around in confusion. The glass was gone. The bread was gone. Not even crumbs remained on the wooden steps. I crouched down, running my fingers over the wood, finding nothing but smooth, weathered boards. I stood up slowly, scanning the yard and the edge of the forest. No animals I knew could carry away a glass without breaking it. And why would they take the paper wrapper too? Back inside, I leaned against the kitchen counter, my coffee forgotten as I processed what had just happened. Something had taken my offerings. Something that was careful enough not to leave a trace. Over the next few days, I established a strict routine based on Remy's rules. Every night before bed, I closed my bedroom closet door and checked it twice, making sure the latch caught properly. I set an alarm on my phone for 9:45 p.m. to remind me to draw all the curtains in the house. One night, I heard rustling sounds from the yard around midnight. It sounded like something large moving through the underbrush at the forest edge. My first instinct was to look outside, but I remembered rule number 5 and stayed put, keeping away from the windows even though the curtains were drawn. The knocking continued every night, always the same pattern, always stopping mid-sequence after about 15 minutes. I learned to sleep through it, or at least to lie still with my eyes closed until it stopped. The footsteps in the attic were harder to ignore. They seemed to come at random times, sometimes during the day while I was working, sometimes in the evening as I was watching TV. Once they woke me at 3 a.m, heavy thuds directly above my bed. Each time I followed Rule 4. I kept the stereo remote with me at all times, and as soon as I heard the first footstep, I would turn the music on, cranking the volume until the bass made the windows vibrate. The footsteps always stopped immediately, but I learned to leave the music playing for at least 20 minutes before gradually lowering the volume. My neighbors, if I had any close enough to hear, must have thought I was having some strange, sporadic parties at odd hours. But no one ever complained, and I never saw any other houses through the trees surrounding my property. The second Sunday, I placed another glass of milk and loaf of bread on the steps without hesitation. This time, I didn't feel ridiculous. I felt like I was upholding my end of some unspoken agreement. By Monday morning, they were gone again, the steps as clean as if nothing had ever been there. I found myself settling into this bizarre routine with surprising ease. The house felt different somehow. Still strange, still harboring its secrets, but less threatening. As long as I followed the rules, whatever presence shared my home seemed content to maintain its distance. At night, lying in bed listening to the rhythmic knocking at my front door, I sometimes wondered what Remy Ross would think of me now. Would he nod approvingly at how quickly I'd adapted to the house's peculiarities, or would he laugh at how thoroughly I'd been converted from skeptic to believer? Either way, I understood now why he'd left the note. Not as a joke or the product of an aging mind, but as a genuine attempt to help the next occupant of 1247 Pine Ridge Road. A guide for peaceful coexistence with whatever had taken up residence here long before either of us arrived. And as I drifted off to sleep each night, closet door firmly shut, curtains drawn tight against the darkness outside, I found myself grateful for Remy's rules, my new normal in a house that was anything but. I noticed the strange happenings around the house were becoming less frequent. After 3 weeks of following Remy's rules without fail, The knocking at the front door had softened considerably, happening only 2 or 3 times a week instead of the nightly disturbances I'd grown accustomed to. The attic footsteps now occurred every few nights rather than daily, giving me more peaceful evenings than I'd had since moving in. My Sunday ritual of leaving milk and bread on the back porch steps continued without interruption. Each Monday morning, I'd find the offerings completely gone. No crumbs, no drops, no trace left behind. I never caught sight of whatever took them, despite the occasional temptation to peek through the curtains after setting them out. The rules were working, and I wasn't about to mess with success. Still, questions about the house nagged at me. What exactly was I living with? Why these specific rules? And most importantly, how had Remy Ross managed to live here for so long? I sat at my kitchen table one Tuesday morning, coffee in hand, staring at Remy's note that I'd taped to the refrigerator as a constant reminder. The yellowed paper had become my household constitution. My finger traced over his handwriting as I considered who might know more about the previous owner. The real estate agent. She would have background information. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Avery Douglas's number. She'd handled my purchase of the house and might have insights about Remy that could help me understand my situation better. She answered on the third ring. Avery Douglas speaking. Hi, Avery, this is Stevie Bowers. I bought the house on Pine Ridge Road a few weeks ago. Stevie, how are you settling in? Everything working out with the property? Her voice carried that professional warmth real estate agents perfect. The house is fine, thanks. I paused, considering how to phrase my question without sounding like I was losing my mind. Actually, I was calling to ask about the previous owner, Remy Ross. I'm curious about his history with the place. There was a slight pause on her end. What would you like to know specifically? How long did he live here? And did he ever mention anything unusual about the house? Remy owned that property for exactly 30 years, Avery said. Moved in back in the early 90s and never left until his health required the move to assisted living. 30 years, I repeated. That was a long time to live with whatever presence shared this house. Did he ever say why he was selling? Just that it was time. His mobility was becoming limited, and managing a house that size alone wasn't practical anymore. She paused again, though he was quite particular about finding the right buyer. What do you mean? Well, this isn't standard practice, but Remy insisted on meeting potential buyers before approving any sale. He turned down 3 offers before yours, even though 2 were above asking price. That caught my attention. He wanted to meet me. I never met him. You did, actually. Remember when I asked you to come to the office that day to sign some preliminary paperwork? The older gentleman sitting in the waiting area? I vaguely recalled an elderly man sitting quietly in the corner of Avery's office. We'd made brief eye contact, but I hadn't thought anything of it at the time. That was Remy. He wanted to see you in person before giving his final approval on the sale. So he was, what, judging me somehow? Avery laughed lightly. I wouldn't put it that way. He just said he wanted to make sure the house went to someone who would appreciate it properly. A chill ran through me. Had he been looking for someone who could handle the house's peculiarities? Someone who would follow the rules? Is there anything else you can tell me about him? Where he is now, maybe? He's at Sunset Manor, the nursing facility about 20 minutes from town. I check in on him occasionally. He doesn't have much family left. After thanking Avery and ending the call, I sat at my table for a long while, thinking. Remy had lived with this situation for 30 years. He'd managed it, adapted to it, created rules to coexist with whatever shared his home. And now he'd passed that responsibility to me, apparently by choice. I needed to talk to him. That afternoon I drove to Sunset Manor, a single-story building surrounded by well-kept gardens. The receptionist directed me to the common room after I signed the visitor log. I found Remy sitting by a window, watching birds at a feeder outside. He was frailer than I remembered from that brief glimpse in Avery's office, thin, with papery skin and wispy white hair. but his eyes, when they turned to me, were startlingly alert and sharp, lacking the cloudiness often seen in the very elderly. "Mr. Ross?" I approached his chair. "I'm Stevie Bowers. I bought your house on Pine Ridge Road." His expression changed immediately, sharpening with recognition and something else. Concern, maybe. He studied my face carefully before speaking. "You found my note." It wasn't a question. I nodded, taking the empty chair beside him. "Yes, behind the refrigerator." "And?" His gaze was intense, waiting. "I've been following the rules," I assured him. "All of them. The milk and bread every Sunday. The curtains closed by 10. Never answering the door after 11. Relief visibly washed over him. His shoulders relaxed and he leaned back in his chair. "Good," he said. "That's good. Mr. Ross." "Remy," he corrected. "Call me Remy." "Remy, what exactly is in my house?" He looked out the window again, watching a chickadee land on the feeder. "Our house," he corrected softly. "It was never just mine, and it's not just yours now either." "Then what is it that we're sharing it with?" His eyes returned to mine, studying me with that same penetrating gaze. "You've been following the rules," you said. "Have the disturbances lessened?" "Yes. The knocking isn't every night anymore. The footsteps come less often." He nodded, satisfied. "Then you're doing it right. The rules work if you follow them consistently." "But what is it?" I pressed. "I lived in that house for 30 years, young man," Remy said, his voice steady. "I raised a family there. My wife died there. And in all that time, I never once tried to find out what shares that space. You never wanted to know." "Want?" "Oh, I wanted to know at first, very much." He gave a small, humorless smile. "But wanting to know and needing to know are different things. I decided early on that I didn't need to know, and that decision kept me safe for 3 decades. "How did you figure out the rules?" Remy's fingers tapped lightly on the armrest of his chair. "Trial and error, mostly. The first rule, about the closet doors. That came after my daughter woke up screaming one night. Said she saw someone standing in her closet. The curtain rule came next after I saw." He trailed off, shaking his head. "Well, let's just say I learned not to look outside after dark." "And the offerings? The milk and bread?" "That was my wife's idea, actually. She grew up in a small village in Europe. Said her grandmother used to leave offerings for the house spirits." He smiled at the memory. "I thought it was silly, but I tried it anyway. The very next day, all the knocking stopped for a week. So I kept doing it." I leaned forward. "Did you ever see what takes them?" "No." Remy's tone was firm. "And I never tried to. Some boundaries are there for a reason, Stevie. But you lived with this for 30 years. Weren't you curious?" "Of course I was curious. But I was more interested in living peacefully." He fixed me with that penetrating stare again. "The rules work. They create boundaries that both sides respect. Break those boundaries, and..." He didn't finish the sentence. "And what?" I prompted. "I only broke the rules once," he said quietly. "Just once in 30 years. That was enough." I wanted to ask what happened, but something in his expression stopped me. There was a haunted quality to his eyes that hadn't been there moments before. "Is that why you wanted to meet me before selling the house? To make sure I'd follow the rules?" Remy nodded slowly. "I could tell you would. Some people have that quality. They respect boundaries. Others need to push them, test them. Those people wouldn't last a month in that house. But you never tried to tell me about any of this before I bought the place." "Would you have believed me?" he asked simply. I had to admit he was right. If a seller had told me his house came with supernatural occurrences and a list of bizarre rules, I'd have walked away thinking he was senile or trying to back out of the sale. "Besides," Remy continued, "I left the note where you'd find it. I knew you would, eventually. Everyone moves the refrigerator when they clean." You could have put it somewhere more obvious. And risk someone finding it who shouldn't? No. It needed to be discovered by the new owner, not visitors or repair people. We sat in silence for a moment. Outside the window, the birds continued their busy activity at the feeder, oblivious to our conversation about the unknown. "So that's it?" I finally asked. "Just keep following the rules indefinitely?" "That's it," Remy confirmed. "It gets easier with time. Eventually it becomes second nature, like locking your doors at night or turning off the stove before leaving. Just another part of living in that house." "And it worked for you? For 30 years?" "It did." A small, satisfied smile crossed his face. "We had a good life there, my family and I. The house protected us as much as we respected it." "Protected you?" Remy nodded but didn't elaborate. His eyes had that faraway look again, lost in memories I couldn't access. "You chose me," I said, realizing it fully now. "Out of all the potential buyers, you picked me to live with whatever this is." "I did," he admitted, "and I don't regret it. You have the right temperament. For living with a ghost?" Remy chuckled softly. "Is that what you think it is? A ghost?" "What would you call it?" He shrugged his thin shoulders. "A presence, an entity, a neighbor of sorts. The name doesn't matter as much as the respect." A nurse appeared in the doorway, announcing that it was time for medication. Remy nodded to her before turning back to me. "Keep following the rules, Stevie. That's all you need to do. The house will take care of the rest." As I stood to leave, he caught my wrist with surprising strength for someone so frail. "One more thing," he said, his voice low and serious. "If you ever decide to sell, and I mean ever, you call me first. Even if I'm not, well, even if I'm not here anymore, you tell Avery to check with my family. Promise me." The intensity in his eyes made me nod without hesitation. "I promise." He released my wrist and settled back in his chair, seemingly satisfied. As I walked away, I heard him call after me. "Stevie, the milk and bread. Make sure it's fresh each time. It knows the difference." I listened intently as Remy explained how he'd managed to live peacefully in the house for 30 years by strictly following those rules. "Never missed a Sunday offering," he said, his thin finger tapping on the arm of his chair. "Not once in 30 years. Even when my wife was in the hospital that weekend, I drove back home just to put out the milk and bread." The common room at Sunset Manor was quiet, except for the occasional clink of dishes from the nearby dining area. A few other residents dozed in chairs positioned near the large windows, but none were close enough to overhear our conversation. "And you never looked out the windows after 10? I asked. Remy shook his head firmly. "Never. I learned that lesson early." His eyes took on that haunted look again, like he was seeing something beyond the bird feeder outside. "The curtains stay closed, period." "What about the knocking? Did you ever slip up and answer the door after midnight?" "Only once," he said, his voice dropping so low I had to lean forward to hear him. "Only once in 30 years. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't push him on it. The tightness around his mouth told me enough. I shifted in the vinyl visitor's chair, trying to process everything. But what is it? A ghost? Some kind of whatever entity inhabits the house can be managed simply by respecting its boundaries, Remy cut in, his tone suddenly brisk and practical. That's all you need to know. His choice of words struck me. Not a ghost or spirit, but an entity. Something that required management through boundaries and rules. "But don't you want to know what it is? After 30 years? I pressed. Remy looked at me directly, his blue eyes sharp and clear despite his age. "I never found out," he said plainly. "And I never wanted to know. How can you live with something for 30 years and not want to know what it is? There's a difference between wanting to know and needing to know. He leaned forward slightly. "Some mysteries are better left unexplored, Mr. Bowers." I opened my mouth to argue, but stopped when I saw the absolute certainty in his expression. "Peaceful coexistence is entirely possible if you stick to the rules," he continued. "That's what matters. Not what it is, but how you live with it." A nurse appeared at his side with a small paper cup of pills. "Time for your medication, Mr. Ross." Remy nodded at her, then fixed me with one last meaningful look. "Follow the rules. Don't get curious. That's how I made it 30 years. I stood up, knowing our time was over. "Thank you for talking with me. Remember what I said about selling the house." He called after me as I turned to leave. "I need to approve whoever comes next. They need to understand." "I remember," I assured him. His papery hand lifted in a small wave. "Fresh milk and bread," he reminded me. "Every Sunday. It knows the difference." The drive back from Sunset Manor gave me time to think. The late afternoon sun filtered through the trees as I wound through the rural roads leading to my house. Our house, as Remy had corrected me. The thought no longer bothered me as much as it had when I first discovered the note. I pulled into my gravel driveway just as the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the front yard. The house looked perfectly ordinary from the outside. Weathered wood siding, modest porch, surrounded by tall pines. Nothing to suggest it harbored anything unusual. A strange sense of acceptance settled over me as I unlocked the front door. This was my home now, shared occupant and all. I had found a way to live here harmoniously, even if that harmony required following 6 bizarre rules that would have seemed insane to me just a few weeks ago. Inside, I moved through my evening routine with a new sense of purpose. I checked all the windows, making sure each curtain was ready to be drawn before 10. I walked through the house, listening for any sounds from the attic, but everything was quiet. The house felt different now that I understood more about its nature. Not exactly welcoming, but not actively hostile either. After dinner, I went about my normal activities, but with heightened awareness of the time. At precisely 9:45, I drew all the curtains, checking each twice to ensure no gaps remained. I kept the stereo remote within reach on the coffee table, just in case. At 11, I decided to turn in for the night. In the bedroom, I methodically closed my closet door, testing the handle to make sure it was fully latched. I changed into sleep clothes and sat on the edge of the bed, looking around the room that had been the site of my most frightening experience in the house so far. The memory of the swaying clothes and the empty space created in the middle of my closet still sent a chill through me. But now, with the rules being followed, the room felt secure. Not safe exactly, but manageable. I prepared for another night of sharing my home with whatever unseen presence resided there. The thought no longer filled me with dread. Instead, I felt an odd sort of truce had been established. I would respect the boundaries, and it would respect mine. As I settled into bed, I reflected on my situation. The initial weeks of terror had given way to something more sustainable. I had discovered a path forward, one that allowed both me and the house's other occupant to exist without conflict. I reached over and turned off the bedside lamp, plunging the room into darkness. The curtains were drawn tight, the closet door firmly shut. Outside, an owl hooted somewhere in the pines. Inside, the house creaked and settled around me, its familiar noises now distinguishable from the other, less natural sounds I'd learned to recognize. I had made it through the worst part, the discovery, the fear, the uncertainty. Now I knew the rules, and as long as I followed them, I could make this work. Both of us could. I'd gotten used to the routine. After 5 months, the rules felt less like supernatural protection and more like just another part of my day, like brushing my teeth or locking the front door. I even made a checklist on my phone. Curtains closed by 10, closet door secured, fresh bread and milk every Sunday. Simple stuff that kept the peace. The knocking had tapered off to just once a week, usually Thursdays for some reason. The footsteps in the attic now only happened maybe twice a month. I still jumped when I heard them, but I'd gotten faster with the stereo remote. One press and whatever was up there would retreat. My life had found a new normal. I went to work, came home, followed the rules, and mostly forgot about my unseen housemate. Sometimes I'd even joke about it to myself, calling out, "Honey, I'm home," when I walked through the door, knowing full well nothing would answer back. Tonight was Friday, and I'd picked up a pizza on the way home. I changed into sweatpants and an old t-shirt, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and settled onto the couch to watch a movie. Some action thriller I'd been wanting to see. I put my feet up on the coffee table and balanced the pizza box on my lap. The movie wasn't great, but it was good enough to keep me watching. My eyelids grew heavy around the halfway point. I fought to stay awake, telling myself I'd just finish this scene, then the next. The last thing I remember was checking my watch, 9:45, and thinking I should get up to close the curtains. I woke with a jolt when the TV switched to the screensaver. The room was dark except for the floating TV logo bouncing around the screen. I fumbled for my phone. 11:30. Shit, I mumbled, suddenly wide awake. I'd fallen asleep on the couch. The curtains in the kitchen were still open. I could see the darkness through the doorway, and my bedroom closet door. I'd left it open this morning when I was deciding what to wear. Multiple rules broken at once. I jumped up, nearly knocking over my empty beer bottle. The pizza box slid to the floor, but I didn't care. I needed to fix this now. The kitchen curtains were closest, but my bedroom worried me more. I hurried down the hallway, flipping on lights as I went. The bedroom door was open, just as I'd left it. I reached around the door frame for the light switch and flicked it on. My closet door stood wide open. I took a step forward, then stopped. There was something in there. Something dark and hunched, partially hidden among my hanging clothes. The shape was indistinct, but unmistakable. A mass darker than the shadows around it, wedged between my winter jacket and a row of button-down shirts. As I stared, unable to move, it seemed to pulse slightly, like something breathing. My brain tried to rationalize what I was seeing. A pile of clothes that had fallen? A trick of the light? But clothes don't breathe, and the light was on, bright and clear. 3 loud knocks shattered the silence, then a pause, then 3 more. The front door. The knocking was louder than I'd ever heard it before, more insistent. It wasn't the usual patient rhythm. This was demanding, angry. I backed out of the bedroom, eyes still fixed on the closet. My heel hit the wall behind me, and I turned and ran back toward the living room. The knocking continued, faster now, no longer following its usual pattern. It was constant, like someone pounding with both fists. As I passed the kitchen, I heard something new, a scratching sound at the window. My eyes darted toward it automatically. The curtains were still open, and through the glass, I saw movement. Something passing by outside, a shadow darker than the night. I looked away immediately, remembering Remy's warnings. The stereo. I needed to turn on the stereo. I lunged for the remote on the coffee table, pointed it at the speakers, and hit the power button. Nothing happened. The batteries were dead. The scratching at the kitchen window grew louder, more frantic. The front door knocking had become a continuous pounding. I ran to the stereo unit itself and jabbed the power button. The system came to life, but at normal volume. I cranked the dial all the way up, not caring what was playing. Heavy bass filled the house, vibrating through the floorboards. I kept my eyes down, avoiding windows as I rushed through the house, pulling curtains closed. In the kitchen, I moved quickly, tugging the fabric shut even as shadows passed across it from the outside. I could see their movement through the thin material, but forced myself not to focus on their shapes. The living room curtains were next. As I reached for them, something hit the window with enough force to make me jump back. The glass didn't break, but the impact was deliberate. I pulled those curtains closed with shaking hands. Back in the hallway, I could still hear the scratching and knocking, even over the blaring music. The sound seemed to be coming from everywhere now. The front door, the windows, even the walls themselves. I stood in the hallway, my back pressed against the wall, trying to decide what to do. My bedroom was at the end of the hall, and something was still in my closet. The guest room was closer, but I'd have to check its closet door too. The bathroom had no closet, but it also had a window. The music wasn't helping as much as it should have. The scratching continued, and now I could hear a new sound. Something moving in the attic. Not the usual footsteps, but a dragging, sliding noise, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. I was trapped in my own hallway, rules broken, with nowhere safe to go. I spent the night in my living room with loud music playing, too terrified to enter my bedroom where the closet entity waited. The bass vibrated through the floorboards as I huddled on the couch, my back against the armrest, eyes fixed on the hallway leading to my bedroom. I'd cranked the volume so high that my neighbors would have complained, if I'd had any neighbors close enough to hear. Every time the music faded between tracks, I caught fragments of the sounds, scratching at windows, pounding at the front door, and that strange dragging noise from the attic. I'd immediately hit replay on the loudest song in my playlist, drowning out whatever was trying to get my attention. My phone battery died around 2 a.m. I plugged it into the wall charger, refusing to move from my spot on the couch. The floor was littered with the remnants of my pizza dinner, a greasy box and crusts I'd been too scared to clean up. My mouth felt dry, but I wouldn't risk going to the kitchen. Not with those shadows I'd seen moving outside the window. At exactly 3 a.m., the scratching and knocking stopped. I noticed it during a quiet moment between songs. That sudden, complete silence. I lowered the volume slightly, straining to hear. Nothing. No scratching, no pounding, no sliding noises from above. Just the normal creaks of the house and my own breathing. I waited 5 full minutes before turning the music off completely. The silence felt heavy, almost physical. I stood up slowly, my legs stiff from sitting in the same position for hours. The digital clock on the cable box read 3:07 a.m. I remembered what Remy had told me about not answering the door between 11 and 3. Maybe that time frame applied to all the rules. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting it. My voice sounded small and pathetic in the quiet house. No response. I took a tentative step toward the hallway, then another. The floorboard near the hall entrance creaked, and I froze, listening. Still nothing. I flicked on the hallway light and peered down toward my bedroom door, which stood open just as I'd left it when I'd fled hours earlier. My heart hammered as I approached my bedroom. I paused at the doorway, reaching around the frame to hit the light switch. The overhead light revealed my room looking surprisingly normal. Bed unmade, laundry basket in the corner, books stacked on the nightstand, and the closet door, the door I'd left wide open when I discovered that dark, breathing mass among my clothes, was now firmly closed. I hadn't touched it. I knew with absolute certainty that I hadn't gone near that closet since backing out of the room in terror. Something had closed it. I stood in the doorway, unwilling to step fully into the room. The closed door somehow felt more threatening than an open one. What was behind it now? Was it still in there, waiting? I backed away, returning to the living room where I grabbed a wooden chair from my dining table. I carried it to the bedroom, set it down just inside the doorway, and stared at the closet. I needed to secure that door, but getting close enough to wedge the chair against it meant approaching whatever might be inside. "I'm following the rules now," I said aloud, my voice shaking. "Curtains closed, no going outside. I'm sorry about before." The house remained silent. Taking a deep breath, I rushed forward, shoved the chair under the doorknob of the closet, and immediately backed away. The chair held firm, its back pressed against the knob, legs angled against the floor. If anything tried to open that door, the chair would at least slow it down. I retreated to the guest room across the hall, checking that its closet door was securely shut before collapsing onto the bare mattress. I hadn't set up this room properly yet. No sheets, just a mattress on a frame. But I wasn't about to sleep in my own bed tonight. I lay there with the light on until exhaustion finally pulled me under around 4 in the morning. When I woke, sunlight streamed through the guest room window. My phone, which I'd brought with me, showed it was past 10. I'd slept for 6 hours in my clothes on a bare mattress, and every muscle protested as I sat up. The house felt normal in the daylight. Birds chirped outside, and a gentle breeze rustled the pines. I might have convinced myself last night was just a bad dream if not for the chair still wedged against my bedroom closet door. I showered and changed quickly, keeping an eye on the bathroom door the entire time. I needed to talk to Remy. He was the only one who would understand, who wouldn't think I was losing my mind. 20 minutes later, I was driving to Sunset Manor, rehearsing what to say. How do you explain to someone that the thing living in your house had nearly gotten you? That you'd broken the rules and seen what you shouldn't have seen? The nursing home was quiet when I arrived. A different receptionist from my last visit checked me in, pointing me toward the garden area where Remy often spent his mornings. I found him sitting on a bench beneath a maple tree, a book open on his lap, though he wasn't reading it. He was watching a squirrel dart across the lawn. "Remy," I said, approaching slowly so as not to startle him. He looked up, and something in my expression must have told him everything. His face fell. "You broke a rule," he said. Not a question. I nodded and sat beside him on the bench. I fell asleep on the couch, forgot to close the curtains, and my bedroom closet door was open. Remy closed his book and set it aside. "Tell me exactly what happened." I recounted the previous night's events, falling asleep during the movie, waking up too late, seeing the dark mass in my closet, the intensified knocking and scratching, the shadows at the windows, how nothing stopped until 3 a.m. As I described the breathing shape I'd seen among my hanging clothes, Remy's face drained of color. His hands, spotted with age, trembled slightly on his knees. "I've only seen it once," he said quietly when I finished. "About 20 years ago. I dozed off in the backyard after sunset. Woke up in the dark, went inside, and there it was." "What is it?" I asked. Remy shook his head. "I don't know. I don't want to know. After I saw it, things got bad for weeks. Constant knocking, scratching all night. Couldn't sleep. It was angry I'd seen it." "What did you do?" "My wife suggested we make amends, double the offerings for 3 weeks straight." His eyes locked onto mine. "You need to do the same. 2 glasses of milk, 2 loaves of bread. Next 3 Sundays. Don't miss a single one. Will that work?" "It did for me." Remy looked away toward the trees beyond the nursing home lawn. "The thing in that house? It's territorial. We're guests in a way. Break the rules, you pay the price, but it can be appeased." "And if I move, sell the house?" Remy's hand shot out, gripping my wrist with surprising strength. "Don't. Not unless you find the right buyer. Someone who will respect the rules, and you contact me first like we agreed." I nodded, and he released my wrist. "Double offerings, 3 Sundays," he repeated, "and don't break any more rules." I left Sunset Manor with a mixture of dread and relief. At least I had a plan now, a way to make amends. That Sunday evening, I placed 2 full glasses of milk and 2 fresh loaves of bread on the back porch steps. I'd bought everything that morning, making sure it was as fresh as possible. As I set them down, I spoke quietly. "I'm sorry about the other night. This is to make things right." I went back inside, locked the door, and followed every rule to the letter. Curtains closed by 10, closet doors checked twice, stereo remote within reach. The house remained quiet that night. Monday morning, all 4 items were gone from the steps without a trace. Not a crumb, not a drop. The following Sunday, I repeated the double offering. Again, by morning, everything had vanished. The knocking had returned during the week, but only once, with the usual pattern rather than the angry pounding from that night. On the third Sunday, I placed the final double offering on the steps with a sense of ceremony. This was the last part of my atonement. As I set down the second glass of milk, I felt a strange sense of connection to this ritual, to this house, to whatever shared it with me. "Last one," I said. "We're good after this, right?" The pines swayed in the evening breeze, which I took as answer enough. That night, the house was completely silent. No knocking, no footsteps in the attic. I slept soundly for the first time in days. Over the next week, things returned to how they'd been before. Occasional knocking on Thursday nights, the rare footsteps in the attic easily silenced with music. The presence had accepted my apology. I'd established a delicate truce with whatever shared my home. I followed the rules, left the offerings, and in return, I was allowed to live here in relative peace. The house belonged to me now, along with its mysterious resident and the unspoken rules that kept both of us safe. Strangely, I felt no desire to leave. This arrangement, odd as it was, had become my normal. I'd come to terms with living alongside the unknown, and that acceptance felt like a personal victory. I'd seen what happened when the rules were broken, and I had no intention of testing those boundaries again. As I sat on my back porch one evening, watching the sun set behind the pines, I thought about how much had changed since I'd first moved in. How I'd scoffed at Remy's rules, crumpled up his note, deliberately left my closet door open that first night. Now I understood. This was the price of living here. A glass of milk, a loaf of bread, closed curtains and closet doors. A small price to pay for a home, even one I shared with something I couldn't name or fully understand.